Everyone told me that climbing Mont Blanc alone was a bad idea. I should have listened. I waited a long time to tell this story. So this story started in 2015. I was working at the time as a personal trainer, and I was doing the job for about a year. I absolutely loved the job, but I hated the sales part of it. And that made me very unhappy. So towards the end of 2015, I took a holiday with Viv and we went to Barcelona. And I was looking forward to it and looking forward to just relaxing and getting away from the job. I think it was the last day of the holiday that both of us went to this shopping mall. And one of the shops caught my eye because it was one of these Mont Blanc shops. I remember looking at the name of the shop and this joke came into my head. And I turned to Viv and I was like, do you think that if I climb Mont Blanc, they'll give me a discount? And I didn't know it at the time, but the seed was planted in my brain. About one day later, I flew back into London. Grey, dark, miserable, wintry London. And I was making my way for the first day of work of the year. And I just remembered that I was really unhappy. I just didn't want to be there. And as I was walking to work, I remembered that conversation that I had with Viv. And from that conversation, from that memory, just came a thought. What if I climb Mont Blanc this year? And I have to say, that one thought gave me so much happiness and energy and life, you know. I just remember that I went back from work at some point that day and opened up the laptop, and the first thing I did was starting to research Mont Blanc. Mainly, can I climb this mountain by myself? And this is where I kind of have to draw the line and explain that at this point, I had only climbed Mount Olympus before, the highest mountain in Greece. I didn't have any crampon or ice axe experience, no glacial travel experience whatsoever. I was a complete rookie. I remember reading that there was a route on Mont Blanc that you could do by yourself, and this meant that you didn't have to cross a glacier. At the time, I was faced with this predicament that if I was gonna hire a guide and go with a guide, or if I was gonna do a mountaineering course, I was gonna have to wait at least 1 year to save up all of the money. And this thought of climbing this mountain gave me so much happiness that I didn't see that as a possibility. Now, let's take a little bit of a break before we go into the crazy stuff. I get a lot of messages from a lot of you guys. What do you recommend for me to solo? What mountain can I climb by myself? Because on the channel there are a few videos where I'm climbing mountains by myself as well. I want to say from now that I don't recommend to anyone to do what I did. that was the wrong thing to do. Get a guide, do a course, because what I didn't see at the time was that that was an investment. Learning all of these things by yourself means that you're gonna have to have faith in your ability from something that you learned from a book, which I don't recommend if you're gonna risk your life. So I prepared as much as I could. I studied the route, I trained really hard. Some of my friends said to me that I'm crazy for doing this. One friend actually said that I'm gonna kill myself by trying to climb this mountain. But in my mind, I kind of set a barrier that I'm only gonna go as much as I can, as much as my power allows me to. And just like that, the months flew by. So Chamonix is the mountain town at the base of Mont Blanc on the French side. That was my starting point. I took a minibus into that town. When we got into the town, I knew that I was gonna be able to see the mountain. So I got close to the window, I remember, and I looked up and it wasn't finishing. Like I was like stuck to the window and I wasn't seeing the top of it. And in my mind, this was like a max level boss from a video game, this mountain. And I was scared shitless. So the first day's plan was to take a tramway from Chamonix, quite high up the mountain, and hike and climb from that last station to the Gouter refuge. My main fear, I remember, was getting lost on the mountain because it's such a big route. But pretty quickly I realized that being the highest mountain in Western Europe, there are people everywhere. So I hiked for about 3 hours until I got to a snowy section at about 3,000 meters of elevation. Here I met a father and son who were also attempting the mountain together, James and Matt. Both of them were from the UK, and after a bit of chatting, I learned that James was a mountaineer in his youth, and kind of like a concerned father as well. He was asking me a few questions to determine what my experience was. But anyway, after a little bit of chatting, they said see you later, and they went up ahead. I think everyone was a little bit excited for the section that was ahead. The Grand Couloir. The Grand Couloir is a 600-meter steep and extremely exposed gully that you have to climb in order to get to the refuge. And the climbing part isn't actually the hazard here. When the temperature is hot, it increases the chances of rockfall from above. And this is where you risk also sliding off the mountain in case a rock comes and hits you. Thankfully, when I was there, it was dead frozen. In all honesty, I enjoyed all of that scrambling section all the way to the hut. I started to feel the altitude a little bit. It didn't feel too bad, but I was quite paranoid because that was my first experience with it and I didn't really know how my body was gonna react to it. But I made it to the top of the ridgeline, and the views were incredible. When I got to the hut and stopped, I felt like shit. I actually don't remember anything after I checked in until about dinner time, and even dinner was a little bit patchy. Like, the only thing that I do remember was that Viv was so concerned about me climbing this mountain that she bought Skype credit, which was like a thing there at that time, and she called the refuge to check that I arrived safely. The next morning I woke up at 2 a.m. I was sat at the same table with James and Matt, and I went straight to James and I asked him if he has any sunscreen, because I was that much of a rookie that I didn't even think of bringing that. He didn't even hesitate. He gave me some of his and looked a little bit surprised that I didn't have any, and said to me, "You know, you should really come with us right now when we go towards the summit." We left around 3 a.m. and it was dead quiet. You could see a line of people winding up the mountain with their torch lights on, and also in the distance the lights of Chamonix. It was probably one of the most memorable moments that I ever had on a mountain before. We first started making our way up Dôme du Gouter, which is a 4,300 meter mountain. Straight away I started struggling with the altitude, and I was going slower and slower. I was stopping about every 10 steps, and I asked James and Matt at some point to go ahead because I felt bad that I was holding them back. After a few hours, daylight finally came. It was incredibly cold and the wind was brutal. I remember I passed a section that was very steep on one side, and I was squatting down because I was afraid that the wind was gonna blow me over otherwise. I was suffering from the altitude, I was suffering from the cold, and at some point I started questioning what I was doing. I was thinking to myself, how much longer am I willing to go? Am I making the right decision? I think I went up to about 4,600, maybe 4,700 meters when the wind really started to pick up. Everything just felt very confusing. And I kept going and asking myself, when are you gonna turn back? And suddenly, I bumped into James and Matt. This was such a full-on moment. When we met face to face, the wind was slamming us from one side. They were both completely covered up, and Matt was screaming at me, saying, "We already been up there. We attempted the summit and failed. Chris, I don't think it's a good idea for you to go up right now." But he didn't even finish half of his sentence, and I was already halfway down the mountain like, "We're going home, boys." As we started going down, I was pretty much in my own head. Sad that I didn't make the summit, but in a way happy with the experience that I had. James was in front of me, connected by a rope to his son, who was leading the way. James had these old crampons that he must have bought decades back. And he kept struggling with one of them. They kept coming undone from the middle. And at some point he was going ahead of me. And we reached that really steep section where I was afraid of getting blown over before. And one of his crampons came undone. And I remember I saw him bent over for it, trying to fix it. And suddenly, he just slipped off the mountain. He started sliding really fast. And I looked at him, thinking to myself, surely he's gonna self-arrest, which is a method of stopping yourself with your ice axe. But he didn't. And I looked over to Matt, and he hadn't clocked on to what happened. He was still walking forwards, which basically meant that he was gonna drag him along with him. And I looked at James again hoping that he's gonna stop himself. And then I just had this feeling coming all the way up my spine. He's gonna die. I wish that I could tell you that this next part was a conscious decision, but all I remember was that suddenly I was midair. I grabbed his rope with one arm, chucked the ice axe in with the other, and when I landed on my stomach, I kicked both of my crampons in, essentially trying to act as an anchor. And I remember I closed my eyes, and all I was thinking was, please hold, please hold, please hold. And within about maybe 2 seconds, which felt like half a minute, my arm suddenly yanked. And when I looked down, I saw that I managed to stop his fall. I looked up at Matt, who had a look of terror on his face when he realized what just happened. A few climbers came from behind and started helping me to drag him back up. What was interesting was that even when we were dragging James back up, he still wasn't moving. He was in shock. And the thing that I remember the most after was, once we got him up, he was like so confused. And I walked with him over to Matt, and Matt goes like, what the fuck were you thinking? You could have killed me. Which is not the response that you're expecting from his son. But I guess that's just how he reacted to fear. When we all got to safety, James told me to go on ahead. I thankfully met both of them again that evening in Chamonix. We went out for dinner, and at the end of it, James gave me and Matt £50 to go out and get drunk that night, which we did. I came out of the whole thing with a pretty bad burn on my face because of the sun and the wind, but otherwise with some amazing memories. After that trip, I knew I wanted to climb Mont Blanc again, but I didn't know when. 8 months had passed, I started to get the hang of the PT job that I was doing, and I had aspirations to become a strength and conditioning coach. Things were going well. I had a client who I was working with for a few months, Solomon. Initially, he came to me after he recovered from a dislocated shoulder, a ski injury. Solomon's goal was to get stronger, and he worked really hard for it. One morning, as we were finishing up his session, he said to me that he'd like to get better at jumping because he enjoyed playing basketball. And without hesitating, I said to him that I knew an exercise we could easily implement into his routine: a box jump. He was a powerful guy and about the same height as me, 190. I said to him, let's start on an 80 centimeter box. You'll clear it with ease. And indeed he did. The first 2 reps that he did were flawless. And I said, let's do one more. It was the last minute of the session and the last rep. He jumped, and as he landed on the box, he screamed at the top of his voice. It turns out that as he lifted his knees, he kicked his arm so hard that it re-dislocated his shoulder. I was stunned and devastated when this happened. I called an ambulance. When they arrived, they gave him painkillers straight away and said he needs to go to the hospital. I went with him. In the ambulance, I was at a very low point. Regardless of any excuses, I knew that I got the client hurt during my session. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctor took him straight away to have his shoulder reset. He told me, you might want to be in a different room while we do this. But I told him I wanted to be there. Once his shoulder was reset, I sat on the hallway with Solomon, waiting for the strong painkillers to wear off. He tried to make me feel better about the whole situation, and told me that it wasn't my fault. But I was crushed by what had happened to him. While I was in that hospital, I wanted to give up on being a personal trainer. While we were waiting, I noticed that there was a doctor that was walking up and down in the distance. And when I looked better at him, I noticed that that doctor was James. I couldn't believe it. I tried to make eye contact with him, and every single time I managed, he kept giving me that British expression. You know, the one that you give when you feel a little bit awkward and you don't know how to react. And this happened like 3 times. And at some point, it got to me. And I stood up and walked over straight to his face. And I said, "Don't you remember me?" He said, "I'm very sorry, but I don't know who you are." I said, "We climbed on Mont Blanc together." He looked at me and said, "You're the Romanian guy who saved my twin brother's life." I couldn't believe it. asked me if I was alright and if I needed any help. In all honesty, I was too embarrassed in that moment to admit to him what happened. I still can't believe that encounter happened to this day. That interaction reminded me of something good that I did, and it was so powerful that it helped me to get back to doing the job that I loved. Solomon recovered after a few months and got stronger than ever. He came back and trained with me until the day that I left that gym. After that whole interaction, the only thing that was on my mind was going back and finishing the thing that I started. When I decided to attempt Mont Blanc again, I also decided not to go alone. So I asked my friend Lockie to join. Lockie in turn asked David, his workmate, to join, who was a rock climber but not a mountaineer. We put the plan together fairly late, and by the time I went to book the refuge, all of the bookings were gone. We had a 2-person tent for the 3 of us. Each of us had a sleeping bag, but I didn't bother to get a sleeping pad because I was fairly sure that one of the 2 refuges on the route is gonna have availability on the day. That wasn't the case. We camped 600 meters under the Gouter refuge and planned to wake up at 12 a.m. and do the scramble and the Grand Couloir at night. This way we would arrive at 3 a.m. at the Gouter refuge when everyone else would begin. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I felt the cold constantly coming from the ground through my summer sleeping bag and my jacket. I was freezing. In all honesty, when we started, I felt a lot of responsibility for Lockie and David's safety. But I felt equally positive that we can get this done. This time when I arrived at the Grand Couloir, it was bone dry. We listened out for rockfall, and when it was quiet, we quickly crossed one at a time to the other side. We all kind of relaxed and started to make our way up one at a time. And suddenly, the biggest boulder that I didn't even see hit maybe 2 meters away from me. I had such a primal fear take over me when that boulder came down. It literally sounded like thunder. We climbed the 600 meters up at torchlight. It was epic. The altitude though was a killer. Altitude is one of those things that you kind of have to experience by yourself to understand how it feels. When you're deprived of oxygen, it feels like someone sucked all your energy out. I remember we stopped at the Valot hut, almost at 4,400 meters. We went inside to get out of the wind and recompose. I remember looking at Lockie, whose eyelashes were completely frozen. He looked like he was in so much pain. It was one of those moments that if one of us was gonna give up, we would have all fallen. But nobody wanted to be the guy that gave up. We gave it all to get to that summit. David and Lockie were ahead of me on the last steep push to the summit of Western Europe's highest mountain. As I was going up, I was overcome with emotion, and my eyes teared up. I didn't even realize how much it meant to me until that point. How much it meant that I didn't give up. People told me that climbing Mont Blanc alone was a bad idea. Maybe I should have listened. Doing what I did with no experience was plain stupid. But the initiative I took in following my dream and trusting my own judgment and abilities was something that would take me a long way. Choices like that can add up, leading to outcomes that you never dreamed of, or to your dreams.